Hello and welcome to a look at Circle of the Dark, Spaces Between the Stars, which is a Druid subclass. That's something I came up with, so obviously homebrew and not official, but it's available on DM's Guild as a pay what you want. And of course you can always want to pay nothing, get it for free. So, a bit about the subclass and background, etc. So, this is, not surprisingly, based on the Circle of Stars subclass that is official, and kind of my inspiration from this was my campaign that I'm currently running, the Rel series R1, then up to R10 now, from Road to Rel for R1, and R10 Grim Tour, also available on DM's Guild. All pay what you want, and once again, one can always want to pay nothing. Philosophy professor, so I'm not in this for the money, or I'm in it for the writing. I write these campaigns anyways, been running D&D games since like 1979, so I do this because I fortunately have the luxury of being able to do it because I like doing it. So it's inspired by the Circle of the Stars, and the interesting quote in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, which is, "What about the dark places between the stars? Don't you realize that's where the good stuff is?" And so hopefully this is some of the good stuff. Now in my campaign, I've got my own background for it. My background world goes back to the basically 1980, and so I developed this over the years. And one of the classic problems is, hey, who built all those cool dungeons and stuff that's laying around? Who made all that magic stuff? And in my campaign, I've got some very ancient races that did this, and then came to, as one always happens in fantasy worlds, came to bad ends. So I have the Dursitai, which are in my campaign world, one of the eldest races, and they came to a really bad end, and also the Doron, which are an elf-like people, sort of proto-fae, who also came to a bad end, as because of the gods, for various reasons, robbed the species of their ability to reproduce, and that, of course, led to them eventually perishing. Now, not surprisingly, no people are simply going to accept their own sort of like elimination, even by the gods, and so the Drone attempted to fight against this. And among these was one of their astrologists, who turned to the powers of the stars to try to fight this. And, in my campaign world, this is how the Circle of Stars, totally unofficial, of course, because Wizards of the Coast has their own deal, how it arose. And so she, drawing upon the powers of the stars, created the form of the chalice for its healing power, then turned to the form of the dragon to gain, wisdom into this matter. And then lastly, after finding that the healing power and wisdom were of no use, she turned, of course, to violence, developing the form of the archer, and went in search of, in the ancient ruins of the Dursitai people, looking for some way to save her people. And did not find that, of course, but ended up, because of her experiences there, ending up embracing the dark spaces, the void between the stars. So that's the background for my campaign world in terms of how that came about. And this is kind of a background in my R1 through R10, currently up on R10, got a bunch more planned. You can pay what you want on DM's Guild adventures. So what are the actual features of this subclass? Well, as everyone who plays the game knows, having subclasses that are interesting, but also kind of balanced, because if you have something that's super powerful, then people will just typically want to play that. Unless, of course, they don't want to balance their campaigns. So essentially is a variant of the Circle of the Stars. Now, instead of getting the star maps, etc., that the Circle of the Stars get, the Circle of the Dark Spaces Between the Stars, or simple Circle of the Dark to make it easier, they get a point of absence. Essentially, it's a, kind of doesn't do anything like with super magical powers or anything. It just essentially corresponds to the star charts, etc., of the Circle of the Stars, and it gives them this tiny item that allows them to use their subclass powers. So they gain appropriately enough, the Chill Touch cantrip as a druid spell. They also get the Dark Bolt spell, new spell add for this. As you might suspect, essentially it's Guiding Bolt, except it uses negative energy, or we used to call negative energy, which is necrotic damage. And unlike Guiding Bolt, which essentially grants you advantage on attack against a creature that's lit up, this essentially kind of like disrupts the creature with the power of the darkness between the stars, the void, etc. Essentially confers disadvantage on their next attack. Also, they of course get the ability to use forms. So in the sort of standard class version, of course, you get the sorry, it's jumping around. So in the standard version of the class, the original Circle of Stars, you take on like these constellation style, starry forms. And then, of course, if you're doing the dark between the stars, then you would get the corresponding dark form or void form, or however you want to flavor that if you happen to use this. And so, just like with the Circle of Stars, this swaps out for a use of a wild shape. Basically, you trade one of your wild shape uses to assume, this dark form. Now, just like as usual, retain your character, if you do this, retains your normal stats, but you become sheathed in darkness. You become a manifestation of the dark spaces between the stars. And this form thematically devours light in a 10-foot radius. In mechanical terms, essentially it steps down the light. So bright light steps down to dim light steps down to darkness. Not magical darkness that has all those, magic effects, but just like normal darkness. And as with the Circle of Stars, the form lasts 10 minutes. And of course, one can dismiss it, or involuntarily dismiss it by becoming incapacitated or dead, or using this feature again to switch forms. And the forms are designed to be thematical with this darkness between the stars. The first manifestation is Tendrils. And this is rather like the offensive form, like the archer form, where in this case, of course, instead of shooting a bolt of radiant energy, the tentacles allow one to lash out with a spell melee attack with a range of 10 feet. And it does damage comparable to the archer form of 1d8 plus wisdom. Now, since the archer form has like a range thing, that's quite advantageous in the current form of D&D. Generally, range is better than melee. So what sort of is an add-in to compensate for being like a weaker melee attack, and generally if you're a druid, unless you're in wild shape and, in some kind of like, combat form, you generally don't want to get too close to your enemies because you got leather armor, you're not super good at, at melee. Of course, 5e, most classes aren't super good at melee in a way. Anyway, it's a whole other thing for somebody else to talk about. So it grants the character within this form a reaction where essentially they get kind of like a parry. They can add 2 to their armor class. They're going to be able to see the attacker, etc. So it provides a necrotic damage melee attack with a range of 10 feet. So essentially melee does necrotic damage, which is generally less useful in game than the radiant damage, which is why it's kind of added the parry as kind of a balancing feature, because I'm into balancing stuff. Another form is the devouring dark. So what this does essentially is it's kind of the opposite of the healing one, where like when you heal a creature, you get healed. And this is when you cast a spell that using a spell slot that does damage, you regain hit points yourself. And this is a pretty moderate ability because kind of the meta in 5e is of course that healing is not considered what you should spend your action on. But of course, sort of this extra healing can be useful because it's essentially like a bonus heal. And lastly, for the abilities, the form, there's the Dark Star. This essentially manifests the power of the Dark Star to control in a very tiny amount light and gravity. So it creates a zone of darkness around the character the 15-foot radius. And within this darkness, effectively for the character, it's like bright light. Doesn't do anything about, magical darkness, etc. But your character can see, if you play a character like this, you can see fine in the darkness. Now, other creatures that are in the darkness, including allies, so this can be a disadvantage, have their speed halved. So it's not difficult terrain, it halves speed. And if you've seen, videos where people talk about or read about how like there's difficult terrain, which does one thing, there's speed halving, which does, another thing. There's also, of course, spells like Frostbolt, etc., that reduce movement by a set of amount. So there's all kinds of different ways movement is affected. And this halves movement speed. So the other feature of this is that a bonus action, essentially, you can push or pull a creature. Basically, kind of flavor by the gravity of the dark, the dark sun. So this involves a strength saving throw, not surprisingly, and allows the character to, push or pull essentially 5 feet. So the ability is primarily defensive because it puts you into darkness, which might affect some creatures. Of course, dark vision sees right through it. Also, it slows things down to get to you, which can be good, and gives you the ability to push things away. So these abilities are designed to be kind of comparable to those of the Circle of the Stars, and not, hopefully not super powered, but not super useless. Now, naturally, as your character advances, you gain some other abilities, such as Block the Stars, which is that with the Circle of the Stars, you can do like a wheel or woe thing based on how you roll. This is just basically woe. That you get this limited ability to essentially subtract the d6 from another creature's roll. And this is a reaction that is you can use, and like with the current stuff, it's a reaction you can use a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus, and regained on a long rest. Then at 10th level you get the Deeper Dark, which is improving the damage of the tendrils as well as the effect of the Devouring Dark. Basically upgrades a bit, exactly like with the Circle of the Stars, with its damage from the Archer form and the healing from the Chalice. And rather like the Dragon form, with the Dark Star form, you gain a flying speed of 20 feet. So if the Circle of Stars is, balanced, the Circle of the Dark is also fairly balanced. At 14th level, you get the Emptiness of the Dark, which is comparable to the Circle of the Stars feature, which grants you essentially incorporeal form, and it gives you resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. So a decent defensive ability. The new spell is Dark Bolt, which I described earlier. Again, kind of the necrotic, evil twin. No, not really evil, but twin of the Guiding Bolt. It does necrotic damage, and instead of granting advantage in the next attack against the creature, it kind of like disrupts it, however you want to do that flavor-wise, giving it disadvantage on its next attack. There's also a new magic item. If you'd like to try out, this in your campaign, you already have a druid that's doing the Circle of the Stars. I mention cleric because back in AD&D, druids were essentially kind of like a cleric class. Now and for a while, they've been their own thing. There's a Circle of the Dark Star, which basically allows a druid character, to kind of try out these abilities. So that's a look at the Circle of the Dark Star, or the Dark Place Between the Stars, available again on DM's Guild, and it's pay what you want, and you can want to pay, get it for free. So thanks for taking a look at this. I hope you find the class interesting or useful in your campaign. So stay safe, and I'll see you in the future.